Hello, and welcome to PSYWAR, a weekly podcast of the 8th Psychological Operations Group, Airborne, where we give people an inside look at the Psychological Operations Regiment. Welcome back to PSYWAR. This week we're talking about PSYOP's role in information warfare. And this week we have a special guest with us, Major General Brennan from the 1st Special Forces Command, Airborne. Sir, welcome. Thank you for coming out and talking with us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Mike. Thanks for inviting me.
No, we're really pleased to have you out here. If you don't mind, just kind of tell our audience a little bit about your background.
Sure. I started in the Army as a ROTC cadet, like a lot of folks. I actually wanted to be a F-14 pilot. The Navy didn't take me, but the Army was thankfully gave me a 3-year ROTC scholarship at NC State. And I think the thing that got me interested in Army Special Operations was most of the cadre there. All the NCOs were Green Berets. Some of my fellow cadets who were going through school were former SMU operators at Fort Bragg, so wide exposure to Army Special Operations as a young guy. And I just became attracted to it in my teens and decided that's kind of the career path I wanted to take. So really my first soft job was a lieutenant when I went to SFAS out of Fort Hood, Texas from 1st Cav, and then got assigned to 3rd Group after the qualification course. I commanded a Halo team for about 2 years in 1st Battalion, 3rd Group, and then a scuba team in the same company, B Company 1-3. After that, I was the Battalion S3 for about 6 months, and then I went to SMU selection in '99. And then from there, spent the better part of 12 years over in JSOC in that community. Then came back to USASOC in 2011 or 2010 as the XO to the CG at USASOC. And then from there, War College, spent a year in 7th Group overseas in Afghanistan. And then came back from that, took command of 5th Special Forces Group at Fort Campbell. For 2 years, started up OIR, Siege of SOTF OIR back in 2014, did that for a year, and in 2015 went to SOC Cent, became the Chief of Staff down there. After that was in the 101st Airborne Division for 2 years, spent a year in Afghanistan with them, and then after that came here, back to Fort Bragg, was the DCG of JSOC for 6 months, and then in November of 2019 I took over 1st Special Forces Command. So that's it, in a bag of nuts.
That's a lot of RSOF experience. So basically, from captain all the way to Major General, you've been involved in some capacity with Army Special Operations, or even Joint Special.
And
JSOC.
and interagency.
So the Joint Special Operations Command. You mentioned SMU. That's our Special Missions units. So they do a lot of other stuff within the Special Operations world. So a lot over a good career. When we're talking about PSYOP, one of the things that kind of comes up a lot with some of our viewers, questions we get on social media, are you Special Forces? So I was wondering, for some of the civilians, even some of the soldiers out there, could you talk about, you're the commander of 1st Special Forces Command. Right. Can you speak to the differences, like what is Special Forces, what is PSYOP, what is civil affairs, and kind of what are the differences between the different tribes? And
I see the media mess it up all the time. So Special Forces with a capital S and a capital F, that's what I am, that's my roots, and those are the folks that go to the Special Forces qualification course and wear the Special Forces tab and the Green Beret. Special Operations Forces, which is all lowercase, unless you're using an acronym, that's everything that's Special Operations that falls under the U.S. SOCOM umbrella. Right. So 79,000 personnel in U.S. SOCOM. And then part of that, USASOC, U.S. Army Special Operations Command, is the Army component of SOCOM. And then I command the operational force under USASOC, 1st Special Forces Command. It's 22,000 person strong Army SOF division. It's the only one in the world. It's the biggest Army division. And we have 11 subordinate units comprised of 5 active duty Special Forces groups, 2 National Guard Special Forces groups, a Civil Affairs Brigade, 95th Civil Affairs Brigade, the 2 Psychological Operation groups, 4th and 8th, and then our 528 Sustainment Brigade. So 11 direct report units. And we're scattered all over the world in about 15 different time zones. Right now, we've got soldiers deployed in 60 plus countries doing special operations on behalf of the U.S. government.
Well, it's a lot, huge responsibility. If you don't mind speaking a little bit more to the what we call the 3 tribes.
Sure.
So special forces, kind of what's their, what do they do? Civil affairs, what do they do? And psychological operations, and just the little bit of difference between the three tribes.
Yeah, and I'll start off with, the power and the combinations of those tribes is what makes us more powerful. So we can operate across multiple domains and across the entire operational continuum, from competition to full-up war. So at the end of the day, Special Forces, that's our primary force that operates with indigenous personnel to have outsized effects on the battlefield. So whether that's in support of counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, all the way up to unconventional warfare where we seek to overthrow a despotic regime, that's the force that does it. So they operate on the ground, toe-to-toe, shoulder-to-shoulder with their indigenous partners. Psychological operations, PSYOP soldiers, they're the masters of influence across multiple media, whether it's a leaflet, a computer program, social media. They cause our enemies and our friendly partners to change their behavior, so influencing them to do what we want. Civil affairs, they are our masters of civil-military cooperation. They work with indigenous governments to either create stability where there isn't any, or through the new mission they do, civil reconnaissance, they identify places that are at unrest and they're subject to potential unrest, and they help quell that in a COIN environment, counterinsurgency environment. They also do disaster relief and humanitarian assistance on a grand scale. So they pull together various networks of non-governmental organizations, private volunteer organizations, USAID on our side, and then other nations' similar capabilities to have effects on the battlefield.
So it's a lot. I think the thing you brought up at the beginning is really important, and I've seen it myself on some of the missions I've been on, is that cross-functional aspect where all 3 entities are working together towards a similar goal. I've seen on a few different mission sets, whether it was humanitarian assistance or even direct combat operations, having all 3 together working cohesively definitely ensured different parts of mission success. So I think that's a good takeaway from just the command as a whole.
Sure.
So a long storied career so far in SOF. I'm sure there's still more to come. I
like your optimism.
It's only up from here, right? You reach for the stars, you get the moon, and go for some more. So I'm sure it's changed over the years. I think you said 99 was initial SOF?
No, I went to selection in 1994.
94, okay.
Yep.
So 94 to, we're here in 2020.
Yeah.
Really, what kind of things have you seen over time within SOF? How has it changed?
Really, how the entire Army Special Operations, every tribe has professionalized, and we've gotten much more capable across the board. Obviously, we're the only Army unit that has functional regional expertise, so language, cultural training in the area where we are designed to train and fight in. So that part, we've gotten better at it. We've added more capability across the board to all 3 tribes. I'd say that the biggest difference is the growth, primarily in PSYOP, because we had, I think, 2 battalions when I was a captain, and I never saw a PSYOPer, ever.
Oh, wow.
That was like a battalion or really a group level asset. Not so much anymore. There's obviously a lot more capacity out there. Same thing with the civil affairs. I think there was only a couple of battalions. We were in a brigade, and 528 Sustainment Brigade was a battalion. So we've grown appropriately our enablers more than our actual special forces. I think the only difference, we had 2 reserve groups as well, and those got downsized. So actually the SF component has gotten smaller, the groups have gotten more capable internally, so we've given them more capability to operate across multiple domains, cyber, electronic warfare. They're just way more capable of finding the enemy and destroying them, as well as partnering at the lowest level possible. Initially, and it's kind of like we've gone back to the future. So when I was a cadet, we were told, hey, your life expectancy on the battlefield fighting the Soviet Union is about 6 minutes. So that's the standard we trained to. It was, large scale combat operations. And then as I got into special operations, it was very similar. The Soviet Union had just collapsed. So there was a lot of uncertainty out there, and that's when terrorism took root, obviously. But as a team leader, my focus, our wartime plan was the invasion of Iraq, because we had just come through Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield. And really, Iraq was still a major threat to the Middle East and the world's oil supply. So that was, in third group, that was my primary mission. Not unconventional. That was straight up large-scale combat operations. Because at the time, the Iraqi military was one of the biggest in the world. We've also had North Korea's never gone away. Right. That's nothing new. It's just that our enemy has now become more capable, more deadly. They can project power with ICBMs and nuclear weapons now. So we're getting back to that. Since 9/11, between 9/11 and now, we've been focused primarily on counterterrorism, counterinsurgency operations in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria. We've been very successful, as you saw from, what happened in the early days of Operation Enduring Freedom. A handful of soft teams basically took over that country with some indigenous help from the Northern Alliance. So that shows you the capability, the outsized effects that we've had on the battlefield since 9/11. And now those are wrapping up, so we're getting more into the great power competition, and we are appropriately modernizing all of our formations to get after that threat.
I think it really shows a shift, and really just the ability to operate both from low tech, no tech, to high tech, and it's a testament to the soft, formations and their ability to do that. As you mentioned, the early stages of Afghanistan, horseback, and now we're talking about information warfare, cyber stuff, electronic warfare, and being able to do everything in between. So it's really a testament to what the formations are able to do. So you mentioned PSYOP wasn't a thing really that you were aware of. You never met a PSYOPer before in your early days in SOF. How about between then and now?
Sure.
Like, can you share any of your experiences working with PSYOP soldiers?
Absolutely. So I think the first exposure I had to PSYOP was when we were hunting Noriega down in Panama, seeing the loudspeaker teams blasting AC/DC at the church at the commandancy and the church where Noriega was holed up. And finally the priest just said, get him out of here, because it was just too intense for him. That was like the first exposure. And then really the next exposure, I'd say I was at the captain level, getting ready to do the invasion of Afghanistan. Lots of leaflets were going out on the battlefield. So we got to coordinate what the messaging on the leaflets was. A lot of it was just beware of cluster bombs, don't pick them up. And then once the civil affairs folks did humanitarian assistance drops, it was, hey, this is food, because it was in a bag, and Afghans never seen a halal meal, MRE. So it was telling them, hey, this is food from America for your people. So that was kind of the first inkling I had of it. And then once we got into the deep CT fight in Iraq, similarly in Iraq we had the leaflet drops and a lot of the broadcasts over Commando Solo telling Iraqi units to capitulate, turn their tank barrels behind them, and then that was a signal that they were going to capitulate. So we saw a lot of that on the battlefield. I was on that invasion as well. Obviously not uniformly followed by the Iraqi army, but at the end of the day, it did provide a lot of capability to allow those soldiers that wanted to surrender, and we didn't have to kill them. At the end of the day, it was hugely important, the message that was going out. And then similarly, we told them, hey, where to go for humanitarian assistance. But then once the Al-Qaeda in Iraq threat started emerging, that's when I think PSYOP came into their own. They started using a lot of discrete methods to expose the enemy so that we could target them, as well as deceive them so that we could locate them in a place and time of our choosing. A lot of classified methods, but a lot of it was very unique. And that's when I was a ground force commander, I started having PSYOP formations embedded in mine, and I could actually task them and just tell them the effects I wanted. And then the PSYOP experts, came up with their ways and means to get to the ends.
No, and that's at the end of the day what it's about, changing the behavior.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not doing something.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't want you to show up at a place, stay home.
Yep.
Don't do that. Or surrender, whatever it may be, but it's all in the benefit of the ground force commander's objectives. So,
yep, I'm a huge fan of MILDEC, military deception and tactical deception, and PSYOP folks are the best in the world at planning that and executing it. So the best fight is the fight you don't have to fight. If you can win without shooting,
absolutely,
then that's an immense victory.
Because it's both sides.
Yep.
You've got your soldiers that you're commanding, but you also have the enemy soldier, and you're able to, a soldier that's alive and that's being taken care of, it's a testament to the force, and it has a ripple effect in combat. So, we use the term force multiplier a lot, and that's a big part of what we are.
And I think it started, we had radios in a box just reaching the populace. We couldn't reach them because of the terrain in Afghanistan, and having those ways, with the airborne systems and being able to talk to the people on the ground and message that the government of Afghanistan or Iraq is there to support you. And then it really helped recruit people into their security forces, and then expose where Al-Qaeda and other deviant ISIS, where their formations are, where they're hiding.
No, it's interesting, having gone back there multiple times, seeing the shift in and how the population receives not just us, but the non-state actors that are trying to do illicit activities there. So it's really an interesting perspective over time. We've been in Afghanistan quite some time, pretty much the entirety of my career, and so seeing the shift in where we were to where we are and how we play a role in that has been really intriguing. Something that came out a few weeks ago, I think that things are always evolving. You mentioned it earlier, is how SOF has evolved. General Clark, the U.S. SOCOM commander, has been vocal recently about SOCOM's role in modern warfare. One of the things that he brought up as one of the three major fronts is the war on influence, which, as we mentioned, that's a big role that we play in with PSYOP. So this puts the PSYOP regiment in a really unique position. What do you think, or how do you feel about those comments? And from your perspective, being not quite his level, but 2 levels down. With you have direct control of the PSYOP regiment. So how do you feel about his comments and vision?
Obviously, they're spot on, and then really the COVID outbreak has only amplified the need that we need to be more active in the influence domain, in cyberspace, and the space between the ears. So at the end of the day, we're not going to be shooting tanks at each other. It's going to be influence to expose malign intent from our near-peer competitors, as well as expose how they're providing aid to some surrogates who look a lot like terrorists across the globe. And then since we can't be physically with our partners, we have to do a lot of virtual work now. That goes for all 3 of our tribes. The SF teams have to do more remote advise and assist. And then the PSYOPers are experts at leveraging their partners' capabilities to influence on our behalf. So we're exposing a lot of what China's doing, particularly with COVID. They're blaming it on us, which we know is a false narrative. So we just put the truth out there broadly so that the greater community of the global community can see where it's actually coming from. And then all of the really not so good equipment that the Chinese have provided as a way to influence partners in the Far East, expose how that equipment doesn't work or it's defective, and then highlighting the things that we donate actually work. So the compare and contrast, and that sways the tide of influence out there in the Far East. So Similarly, with Russia, they're doing the exact same thing, blaming us for spreading COVID across Europe. Obviously, a false narrative. So the PSYOPers are doing a great job of combating that in cyberspace, social media, and then with partners. The voice of our partners is much more genuine because it's in the native tongue, and having them promulgate our message, I think, is huge.
Now it goes back to the RSOF mantra, by, with, through. You know, those partners become key for leveraging, whether it's training, you know, the advising, assisting piece, but also doing influence operations. So General Clark also mentioned another, you know, front. One of those was war on talent, and so that's a big thing when you start talking about special operations. You know, who are we looking for? What's the right person to come here, and then how do we manage that once it's here? So, you know, in your eyes, from where you sit, you know, looking at the PSYOP regiment, what kind of people should we desire? Or if you're, you know, if there's somebody out there that's thinking, if this is, you know, the right place for me, should I go to that? You know, go to the RSOF, go to the PSYOP regiment. You know, what do you think from where you sit that should look like?
Well, all of our formations, you know, we conduct selection processes for a reason. So we're looking for, universally, all RSOF operators, we're looking for folks that are trustworthy. They can excel in ambiguity. They're problem solvers. They're smart. They're physically fit, tough, and mentally tough. So those attributes cross-cut all of our formations. And then we fine-tune it based on a person's attributes and what they bring to the table, their experiences, their aptitudes, etc. So they're assessed on that. For PSYOPers in particular, we're looking at creative minds, folks that have kind of a marketing skill, if you will, so they can sell a product, because that's what they're doing. They're selling the truth to people who may not want to believe it. We're looking for artists, people that can create an image out of an idea that looks and acts like something that is interesting to a target audience. People who are analytical that can assess that target audience. And then really measure effects. So that's why they got to be experts in assessments. Really, and I'm looking for more digital natives now than ever before. So we're always hiring.
Yep, absolutely.
And PSYOPs in particular, it's a skill that I think will set people up once they get out of decide to return to civilian life. They'll have some awesome skills to take with them, whether it's running studios like this. I mean, these are soldiers running this. So that says a lot about the skill set, the breadth of the skill sets you get as a PSYOPer. Right. And I think it's a growth industry across the board. We're talk about the golden age of PSYOP. It starts now, and it's going to be more important. It's a way to have effects against near-peer competitors without launching ICBMs at each other.
No, absolutely. I think one thing that I would probably add to that, or two things, would be able to communicate. You know, you mentioned being digitally savvy, which is great.
Yep.
But we still need people that can communicate, because we're talking by, with, through. Sometimes that by, with, through means we're having a conversation. So communication is, you know, important across all forms of media, whether it's digital or in person. So having the ability to communicate is key. It can be learned. We've had some guests on here. We've talked about this before. That you know, how do you teach somebody to communicate? Well, sometimes it's just going out and talking. I saw it as an instructor where students had no problem texting, you know, the keyboard warriors, but as soon as you got face to face, it changed the dynamic.
Yeah, I couldn't look you now.
So that's a big part of what we do. And I'd say the other thing is just a real strong moral compass. You know, you mentioned being out in ambiguous environments, and I think having that is key, because you may be by yourself and you have to do the right thing. And, you know, you represent your unit, First Special Forces Command, and the Army as a whole. So having that moral compass is important.
Being able to speak truth to power, I think, is important as well, because you know, Staff Sergeant PSYOPers are talking to ambassadors, they're talking to 3- and 4-star generals. And then their formations tend to get attached to formations that have higher ranking commanders in them. So being able to tell that commander the real deal about what's going on in the information environment and how he should better affect it for him So that's important as well.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, sir. So talking about how SOF has evolved over your time in special operations, how does that look within the command?
Sure. Since I took over First Special Forces Command, we've undertaken a major modernization effort that affects all of our formations. So we have what's called the .MLPF change request in for the PSYOP groups, both PSYOP groups, the Special Forces groups, as well as the CA Brigade, and the 528th is going to be next. So they're all in various stages of approval. The big thing for the PSYOP regiment is we are transforming into a 12-person unit of action, a PSYOP detachment, that will be universal across all of the 4th Psychological Operations Group. And 4th POG will be the regional group. Each battalion is focused on a different global geographic combatant command, aligned with a Special Forces group. So, for example, first group has Indo-PACOM. So aligning with the Special Forces group, so those 12-person units of action can break down into a 6-person team or a 3-person team to work in niche locations like in embassies and as part of information warfare task forces out there. The 8th POG is our global psychological operations group that is focused on really affecting cyberspace, social media. That's where we're putting a lot of our digital natives. So that the 2 battalions, 3rd Battalion, which runs the Media Operations Center, is going to take over what's called the Information Warfare Center, where we provide effects through cyberspace across the globe and across geographic combatant command boundaries. So that's the biggest change. We've shifted 1st and 5th psychological operations battalions out of 8th POG and over to 4th to make them purely regional, and we pulled 3rd over to the 8th. So that's the biggest change we've got going on. We're also awaiting some additional authorities to do messaging from Fort Bragg, where most of the psychological operations capacity for the United States government resides. So we have a lot of capacity here that we're going to start leveraging globally in support of Cyber Command, Air Force Cyber, the interagency, as well as our forward deployed theater special operations commands.
So doing more from Fort Bragg.
Doing more from Fort Bragg.
So we're kind of coming to the end here. And so I wanted to kind of do one last shout for our guys out there. If there's somebody that's interested or looking for something different, they're looking at PSYOP, they're looking at Army Special Operations, what advice or encouragement would you have for them?
Seek that opportunity as quickly as possible. There's multiple ways to do it. We're hiring off the street, just like our Special Operations Recruiting Battalion. They take folks from off the street, whether you're in college or if you're in the greater community and you want to serve. First Special Forces Command and our regiments are a great place to serve. You'll be surrounded by competent people who have a higher calling and a very nationally important mission. And then of course you're set up after you decide to end your service, you're set up with some great skills on the outside. So I'd recommend folks, there's a lot of television shows out there. You can, in addition to the SORB recruiting and your podcast, there's lots of information about what it's like to go through those selection courses and what it's like to go through training. So I'd recommend do some research and figure out which tribe works best for you, and based on your skill set and your background. But give it a try. That's the hardest part is the first step, signing up and trying.
I tell people all the time, don't self-select.
Yep.
Because there are a lot of people that probably would do well here, but they make up their mind that they won't do well, and so they don't take that first step. So, don't self-select. Just go do it. Try it.
And PSYOP's offering some very good lucrative bonuses right now.
They are.
To get in it and stay in it. So
yeah, I think the initial entry is something like $30,000, and currently reenlistment bonuses are tier 8, something around $58,000, which is it's pretty nice. It's not something I got when I reenlisted my last reenlistment, so a little jealous, but it is what it is. I'm here.
Timing's everything.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Well, sir, I definitely appreciate you coming out and talking with us. It's really been a pleasure.
been my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Mike.
No problem, sir. All right. And we'll see you next time out on the break field or something like that.
In the gym.
In the gym, absolutely. As always, thanks for watching PSYWAR. Like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.